It was raining again, the kind of steady, unremarkable drizzle that made the air feel heavy and alive, like the city was breathing just under the skin of the clouds. I had left my headphones on the counter that morning, so I could hear the world too clearly. The soft ticking of rain against the windshield, the low growl of engines on wet pavement, the faint hum of the city that never quite went silent. I remember thinking how strange it felt to be driving home, not to a shared apartment or a dorm or someone else's rented space, but to a house with my name on the deed. My first real home, my house. I'd closed on it 6 weeks earlier. A small craftsman with chipped blue paint, overgrown ivy, and enough character to remind me of what independence actually sounded like. Silence that belonged to me. I was still getting used to the quiet. That night, when I pulled into the driveway, the porch light was already on. I froze. I never left the light on. The drizzle had turned into fine mist, glinting under the yellow bulb, and through it I saw something that made my stomach fold in on itself. A second shadow moving across the living room window. I killed the engine and sat there, gripping the steering wheel. My breath fogged up the windshield. For a second, I thought maybe it was a reflection. Maybe I was just tired. I'd been debugging for hours, chasing an error that didn't exist. But then the shadow moved again, and this time I saw her. Aunt Lydia, wearing her beige raincoat, the same one she'd had since I was 12. I blinked as if my brain needed time to reboot. My keys were still in the ignition. When I finally stepped out, the cold hit me like a wall. The door was unlocked. Unlocked. My hand trembled as I pushed it open, the soft creak of the hinges sounding like an alarm. The smell hit me first, sautéed onions, garlic, and something frying in oil. The scent of my childhood kitchen. The one I'd escaped. Then came her voice, cutting through the sound of sizzling butter. "Sweetheart, you're home early." Early? I walked into my kitchen and there she was, standing by my stove like she'd never left. Like the last 8 years hadn't happened. Her short hair was pinned back neatly, her gold cross glinting in the light. And next to her, leaning against the counter, scrolling through her phone, was Nora, my cousin. The pan hissed as Lydia stirred it, smiling over her shoulder. "We thought we'd surprise you." My voice came out smaller than I wanted. "How did you get in?" "Oh, come now," Lydia said, waving a wooden spoon. "We still had the spare key, remember?" "No, I didn't. I had changed the locks." Nora looked up and smirked. "You left the side window unlatched. Aunt Lydia said you always forget things like that." I stared at her, my pulse climbing. "You broke into my house." "Our house," Lydia corrected gently. "You wouldn't have this if we hadn't raised you, darling." That word, raised, pressed down on me like a weight. I don't know how long I stood there, half inside my own doorway, half outside in the cold. Everything looked the same, yet nothing felt like mine anymore. There were grocery bags on my counter, the kind Lydia always used from her church's pantry. My kettle was already on the stove. My mug was filled with tea I hadn't made. "How long have you been here?" I asked. "Since afternoon," Nora said, picking at her nails. "We cleaned up a bit." "Your place was kind of dusty?" Lydia smiled like this was perfectly normal. "It just felt wrong that you were here all alone. This neighborhood isn't safe, and you're still so young." "I'm 26. "Exactly. You need family around you?" I wanted to say no. I wanted to scream it. But my voice stayed locked behind my teeth. Because this was what they did. They stepped into my space, rearranged my things, cooked their meals in my kitchen, and called it love. And I froze, every time. Lydia set down the spoon and looked at me with that familiar expression, the one that mixed affection with accusation. "You didn't even tell us you bought a house." "I told Nora," I said quietly. "She doesn't count," Lydia said, glaring at her niece. "You should have called me. I could have helped with the paperwork, made sure you didn't get scammed." "I didn't need help." "Well, clearly you do," she said, gesturing around. "No curtains. Bare walls. It looks like a hospital room." Her tone softened. "We just want to help you settle in." But I knew that tone. It wasn't kindness. It was claiming. Later after dinner, a meal I hadn't agreed to, they insisted on staying just one night. Nora said the rain made driving dangerous. Lydia said she couldn't leave me alone in this place. I slept with my door locked. At 3:14 a.m., I woke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. They stopped outside my door. The handle turned once, then again, and in the quiet that followed, I heard Lydia's voice whisper softly through the wood. "You don't lock doors in family homes, sweetheart." The next morning, Sunlight fell through the blinds in thin, sharp lines, cutting across my desk and catching the dust in the air. I stared at them for a while, tracing the slow drift of particles, free, aimless, and wondered what it must feel like to exist, without anyone trying to rearrange you. From the kitchen came the clatter of pans. They were still here. I dressed quietly, slipped into jeans and a gray sweater, and stood for a moment by the mirror near my bedroom door. My face looked pale, eyes shadowed. I told myself I could handle this, that I just needed to hold my boundaries. But my reflection didn't believe me. When I stepped into the kitchen, Lydia was already at the table, her Bible open, coffee steaming beside her. Nora sat across, scrolling through her phone, her hair still damp from the shower. "Oh, there you are," Lydia said brightly. "We didn't want to wake you." "You already did," I said, reaching for the kettle. She smiled faintly. "You've always been a light sleeper." "It's the guilt." I paused. "The what?" "Your mother used to say that," she said, flipping a page. "When people can't sleep, it's because their conscience isn't at rest." The words slid under my skin. My mother, her sister, had died when I was 8. I remembered the funeral, Lydia's tight-lipped efficiency, the way she'd hugged me too hard and whispered, "You're mine now." It hadn't felt like comfort then. The day passed in fragments, calls from work, half-finished code, the sound of Nora watching TV too loudly. I couldn't focus. Every time I looked up from my laptop, something in my house was different. My mug, replaced with Lydia's floral one. My mail, opened and stacked neatly for convenience. My framed photo of college friends, turned face down on the shelf. When I finally confronted her, she smiled. "You work too hard," she said, waving her hand like she was dusting away my protest. "You don't need to worry about these little things." "They're my things," I said. "Everything you have, we helped you get," Lydia said calmly. "Don't forget that." I wanted to tell her that wasn't true. That every night, I'd stayed late in front of a glowing monitor. Every paycheck, every rent payment, every line of code, it was mine. But the words tangled with something else. Fear. Because that's what she had built in me. A reflexive submission. The constant need to keep peace. That weekend, I came home from the grocery store to find 2 of my neighbors, Mrs. Rivera and her teenage son, standing in the driveway, chatting with Lydia. "There she is," Lydia called cheerfully. "Our girl, the engineer." I smiled tightly, balancing a paper bag in each arm. Mrs. Rivera beamed. "Your aunt was just telling me how proud she is of you. And that you're letting them stay for a while. That's such a good daughter." I froze. Daughter. I wanted to correct her, but Lydia's eyes cut toward me, warning and soft. Later, when I closed the door, I said, "Don't do that again." "Do what?" "Tell people you're living here." She tilted her head. "But I am living here." "No, you're visiting. And you weren't invited." Her eyes sharpened. "You think you're too good for family now?" Nora appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. "You should be grateful. Most people would kill to have an aunt who cares this much." I stared at them both. "You broke into my home." "It's not breaking in if you belong," Lydia said softly. "This is still part of the family." Something inside me snapped, quietly, invisibly, like a wire pulled too tight. That night, I opened a new document on my laptop. Date log, incident record. I typed out everything. The date, the time, what they said, what they moved, the neighbors, the comments. It wasn't for revenge. It was to remind myself that it was real. When you grow up around manipulation, reality becomes flexible. They bend it, gaslight it, twist it until you can't tell where the truth ends and guilt begins. I needed proof. I needed to believe my own story. Days blurred together. Lydia began answering my phone when I wasn't home. "Just helping," she'd say. "Your voicemail is too impersonal." She cleaned my inbox, rearranged my pantry, started receiving her own mail at my address. Then one evening she brought in boxes. Just a few things from my house. "Nora and I are downsizing." My chest tightened. "You're moving in." "Only for a little while," she said sweetly. "Until things settle." "What things?" She smiled, setting down the box labeled kitchen. "Life." I reached out to my friend Daniel, a colleague from work. He listened quietly as I explained everything. "You need to set boundaries," he said gently. "I've tried," I said. "She ignores them." "Then make them legal." He gave me the number of a tenant rights lawyer. The next day I called. I felt like a criminal describing my own life. The lawyer asked, "Are they on your lease?" "No, it's my house." "Then you can evict them." But it might get messy. Messy. That word again, the one I'd spent my whole life trying to avoid. But I nodded. I can handle messy. When I got home, Lydia was in my office. My laptop screen glowed open. She turned toward me, expression unreadable. "What's this?" she asked, gesturing at the document. I froze. "The log?" She pressed. "You're keeping notes on us now?" My throat went dry. "You shouldn't be in here. You think we're hurting you?" Her voice rose, brittle and sharp. "After everything we've done, I fed you. I gave you a roof. I gave you love. You gave me control," I said quietly, "and called it love." Her jaw tightened. "You've changed." "I grew up." That night, they left for a few hours to clear their heads. I sat at the kitchen table, shaking, staring at my front door. I changed the locks again. Then I packed a small bag, just essentials, and stayed at a hotel downtown. For the first time in weeks, I slept through the night. When I came back 2 days later, the door was unlocked again. And on the kitchen counter was a note written in Lydia's careful script. "Family can't be shut out forever." The note sat on my counter for days. I didn't throw it away. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But every time I reached for it, my hand froze midair. Because part of me still believed her. That family couldn't be shut out. That love and ownership were the same thing. But 3 nights later, as I stared at the words for what felt like the 100th time, something shifted. It wasn't a surge of courage or rage. It was quieter than that, like the click of a lock finally turning. I folded the note, slid it into an envelope, and wrote one word on the front: evidence. I spent the next week building a kind of peace that looked, from the outside, like routine. I went to work. I smiled at meetings. I finished code reviews and fixed a back-end deployment issue. But every night, I came home to the echo of my own footsteps, the faint smell of her perfume still clinging to the curtains. And I prepared. Every email, every call, every message she'd sent to my neighbors, my coworkers, my bank, I collected them. Screenshots, timestamps, receipts. I wasn't just saving myself now. I was building the truth. 2 weeks later, Lydia called. "I think it's time we talk," she said, her voice smooth again, as if nothing had happened. Family meeting. Sunday dinner. My house. There was no my house anymore. She'd sold hers. Moved into her sister's old property. The one she'd once promised me I could buy someday. I almost said no, but then I thought, good. Let's end this where it began. Her dining room hadn't changed since I was 12. Same floral wallpaper. Same oak table that groaned if you leaned on it. The smell of roast chicken filled the air. Nora sat beside her, scrolling on her phone. "Sit," Lydia said. I did. She smiled that small, brittle smile that used to mean safety. "You've been so distant, sweetheart. We've been worried. You've let your career consume you." I laughed quietly. "Consume me?" "Don't be sarcastic," she said. "You've forgotten what matters. Family comes first." "Does it?" I asked. "Because when I was saving for my house, you told me I was selfish for not helping you with your bills." Her smile didn't move, but her eyes hardened. "You're misremembering." I slid a folder onto the table. The paper made a soft, deliberate sound. "I'm not." Inside were printed emails, messages, bank transactions, proof of everything. "I don't want to fight," I said, voice low but steady. "But I won't live in denial anymore. You've crossed lines, Lydia. You broke into my home. You lied to people about me. You tried to take what I've built." Nora shifted. "You're being dramatic." "No," I said, meeting her eyes. "I'm being specific." I opened the folder. "This is what you've done. This is what I have documented. And this is the last conversation we'll have about it." The silence that followed was sharp, enough to slice through the smell of roast chicken. Lydia leaned back, folding her hands. "You're recording this, aren't you?" "No," I said. "I don't need to." "I've already won." "Won," she repeated, voice trembling slightly. "This isn't a competition." "It was never a competition," I said. "It was a cage. And I'm stepping out." Her face softened, practiced, maternal. "I did it all out of love." "I know," I said. "And that's the problem." I left before dessert. She didn't call after that. 6 months later, I moved again, not far, just across the river. A small apartment with wide windows and a balcony that caught the morning light. I changed my phone number. I blocked her emails. I didn't announce my new address to anyone. The first week there, I bought a small fiddle leaf fig and placed it near the balcony door. Every morning, I watered it with measured precision, watching it lean toward the light. It became a ritual, a quiet declaration that I was still growing, even after being uprooted. Sometimes, when I hear the faint creak of a floorboard or a distant knock, my body tenses, old instincts, old fear. But then I remind myself, this door locks from the inside. I keep my spare keys in a box labeled only mine. And sometimes on quiet nights, when I walk through the apartment barefoot and the city hums outside, I realize something simple, something I had never dared to believe before. Freedom doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just breathes. 1 year later, I sat in a cafe near my office, laptop open, sunlight warming my wrist. I was mentoring a new developer, a quiet woman with the same hesitancy I used to have. She told me she was afraid of disappointing her family by moving out. I smiled softly. You can love people and still choose yourself. She nodded, unsure, and I thought, yes, I'd been there too. When she left, I opened my old document, date log, incident record. I read the first entry, then scrolled to the last. Then slowly I highlighted the entire thing and pressed delete. The screen went blank. I exhaled. And in that silence, I finally understood. They could take memories, names, comfort, but they could never take me. Because the keys I never gave them were never just for doors. They were for my life. And now they're only mine.